Hello, my name is Linda Gaus, and I'm going to read two excerpts from my sample translation of Patricia Hempel's novel, Abandoned Nests. Abandoned Nests was presented to and selected by the jury of New Books in German in spring 2024, so it is guaranteed translation support from the Goethe Institute. Part 1. Swallows Make Good Mothers. Chapter 1. Summer vacation descended on the wasteland, and right in the middle of it I turned 13. There were no longer many people living where we lived in the three-story barracks on the water across from the decommissioned concrete plant. From the shore, the housing complex looked like a chunky landslide. It overran the Elbe River's wetlands with their hidden beaches and cut into the landscape like the train tracks that ran by it toward the canal bridge. The 7 buildings stood in a row like dominoes, and nothing but yarrow grew between them. In summer, the white heads of the flowers pushed up between the factory's lattice bricks, reconquering the fallow land. My generation failed in its attempt to play soccer on these lattice bricks. Every good shot simply bounced off their sharp corners and backfired. That's why, as often as they could, the best goalkeepers moved their games to the meadow behind the barracks until the custodian chased them away. On weekends, the mothers washed grass stains out of jerseys and combed the bricks with plastic bags for yarrow to make yarrow lemonade for the boys playing soccer and for the girls who hung listlessly around the adjacent playground or filled animal-shaped plastic molds with sand. Katja didn't do either of these things. When she was in the mood, she carried water in colored pails from the jetty, where the rowboats were moored, to the playground, and the girls fought over the pails each time she arrived. It was actually forbidden to cross the Elbe promenade and go to the shoreline alone, but Katja always said, "We're not children any more," and proceeded to carry 2 pails at once. There was a clear hierarchy on the playground. The sandbox belonged to the sandbox girls, and the Vietnamese sat next to the asphalt on their picnic blankets and sold cigarettes. But the best part, a labyrinth of large concrete pipes, belonged to Katja and her best friend Bina. They played family in the pipes. Katja was the father and Bina the mother. One of the sandbox girls had to play the child and was paid in cola. "The family's already full," snarled Bina when, a few weeks before the summer vacation began, I asked for the first time whether I could play too. "You could be the house pet if you want," said Katja, clicking her tongue like people do with horses. "Cat or dog?" Bina didn't like this suggestion at all, and she slid right into her role. "But, honey, I don't want a pet. They just make a mess." Before I could decide which kind of pet I wanted to be, Katja took her belt and fastened it to the waistband of my pants. "Heel! What kind of dog do you want to be?" "Huskies are cool," I said, as Katja was pulling me firmly into the pipes. "Okay, then we'll call you Alaska." Chapter 5. Down at the dock, the wisps of sawed-off willows traced patterns on the surface of the river, and invisible gulls screeched, circling over the fishing net poles. Katerina stroked her fingers across the growth rings of one of the stumps and counted. Her father had told her how you could read a tree's whole life from its rings. The narrower the ring, the more difficult a year it had been. This tree seemed to have had a carefree childhood, but a more difficult life in its old age. While the inner rings were thick as a thumb, the outer ones looked more like pieces of twine. The wood reminded Katerina of the summer when Pilly played on the burned-out meadow of the witch's garden, and guests had to put damp cloths on their necks to stay cool, even as darkness was descending. She could read the water level of the Elbe from the tree stump, and the increasing storms that had disrupted the even shape of the rings. The older the willow got, the smoother the transition between the rings became, as if at some point the wind-whipped tree had stopped counting the years. "That's what the worries of a tree look like," thought Katerina, and waved to Eli, who was finally aiming her boat back toward the dock. A cormorant with outspread wings had been sitting on one of the crosswise stumps ever since Eli set out, drying its feathers in the sun. Katerina admired its persistence and ability to find benefit in the clear-cutting of the trees. The saw blades had descended there in the same unsolicited way that her 9-year-old niece had attacked an ant-hill in a garden thicket. Pilly found a branch that was long enough to penetrate the hill. She rammed the stick into its sensitive center again and again until the layers of dirt and pine needles gave way. At lunch, Pilly had reported straight away about how the insects ran off in all directions. Headless, they disappeared between the clumps of the ant hill or simply deserted, seeking the protection of the surrounding foliage. She had never seen so many ants at once. There had to have been more than 1,000. Eli and Katerina listened to her report with raised eyebrows and searched the witch's garden by flashlight for the destroyed ant hill after Pilly fell asleep in front of the TV. A very few ants had begun rebuilding, but most of them were still finding escape routes and trying to drag seeds, cocoons, and eggs to safety. Martine told her that queens are in charge of every construction project. Of course she had to confirm that right away, whispered Katerina, and Eli sighed. Her problem isn't a lack of imagination. Did she search the pile for little metal crowns? A week later, lone ants were still haunting the ruins of the ant hill and didn't know what to do with themselves. They didn't seem to know where they belonged, and Katerina could sympathize with their aimlessness.